Hello, and welcome back to The Biz, the video series for financial advisors and others in the wealth management business. Today I want to talk about the great wealth transfer. Now, if you're watching this video, you're most likely an advisor or work in our industry, and you've heard about the great wealth transfer, which essentially is baby boomers and folks that are getting older in our country have accumulated a lot of money. And by the way, thank you. You probably had a role in that. And now what happens? As that money passes on to future generations, it certainly opens up potential opportunity for maybe clients that are existing clients of yours to attract new clients that have new problems and new things they're trying to achieve with those assets. But also the question of, are we able to retain some of those client relationships? Can we work with multi-generational families? And I want to talk about all those things today because I feel like as we've talked about all of these different topics so far, about growing a practice, being able to right-size a practice, attracting and retaining clients, this is certainly one of those things that sort of permeates through all of those thought processes and discussions. So if we look at the numbers, according to Cerulli Associates, they came out a couple years ago and they said that they expect $124 trillion to pass through 2048. And you may have said 124, huh? I thought it was 84. Well, it was. So in 2022, they came out and said, hey, they expect 84 trillion. So the number's gone up 40 trillion in just 2 years. I don't know if there'll be new numbers coming, but it's only getting bigger. So it really is a massive, massive opportunity. And if you look here on the screen, they broke down who they expect to inherit those assets. So baby boomers are fairly modest, and that will be $6 trillion is their expectation. And that, makes sense because most of those folks don't have parents that they're still going to inherit money from. And maybe it's a sibling or potentially a spouse, but for the most part, those assets are already in that family. Gen X, which is a great generation, we don't get talked about a whole lot. The expectation is for Gen X to be $39 trillion, millennials $46 trillion, Gen Z is $15 trillion, and then the total, as I said, including charities, which makes up the difference, at $124 trillion. So the question is, what do we do with all the information? And the answer is, maybe a lot. There's a lot to unpack there. The first thing that might come to mind, especially if you have an established practice and you have relationships that maybe you've had for 10 or 20 or 30 or more years, is how do you retain those client relationships? Is it an ability to connect with adult children? Does your client want you to connect with them? Is that something that as they get older and you have powers of attorney and more complex planning issues that may come into play, should their adult children be involved from that perspective? Is there an opportunity to meet kids and grandkids and do different things with the family? Maybe it's your client events. Maybe it's more family-centered events that they can bring those folks to. I would definitely think about that. Everyone's practice is different. I would be thinking about how can I connect with future generations, right? That's not a new idea. I'm sure that's something you're already thinking about. But the other side of it is, what about from a planning perspective, right? Are we doing the right planning for our elderly clients? Are we looking at, have we worked with attorneys? Do they have the right relationship? Do they have the right documents? Should there be trust? Who should own assets? If they're lucky enough to be in a position where they're going to pay estate taxes, that's a great. That's like a privilege. That's not really a lot of fun at this point. So, is the planning done if that is the case? And should some of the money pass to the future generations when one spouse passes, if there's a married couple? So there's a lot of planning there that should be done. What about long-term care needs? That's certainly on the top of mind of most clients as they start to get older. So it's like, have we done the right planning, which isn't really exactly what I was doing this video for, and then have we engaged those children? Because A, it makes sense in the planning, and B, it makes sense for continuity of assets. Do they know? Every client's different. Some clients don't ever want to talk about it with their kids. Some people have no issue with it. Do the adult children know the assets that they might be inheriting? What an advantage, right? You probably already know this, but there's difference in tax brackets. Does it make sense for a client to pay some taxes on money as opposed to adult children? What's their tax bracket? There's a lot of considerations there, a lot of planning to be done. And I think, most advisors find that sort of intellectually satisfying to be able to help their clients in those positions. But that can be a really good way to connect with some of the adult children, show the work that you've done, and when they're in that position, maybe being able to help them as well. So there's a lot there, right? What about retention? But then the second piece of this is, what about client acquisition? Is there an opportunity, is people out in the marketplace inherit assets to be able to attract new assets, new client relationships, because you have the ability to work with those folks? And I think there's a lot of different ways to do that too, right? Once again, not to get into a whole marketing video, but the point is kind of like, as you bring in new clients that are younger, are they going to inherit assets going forward? Do they have the network of people, people that are 50, 40, 30 that are inheriting these assets that they would be able to refer you? Do you do events just for those types of folks? Does it make sense to publish content? Hey, you're inheriting money, now what? Are you attractive? Different generations. I mean, nobody's exactly like their generation, I feel like. Like certainly if you look, I'm a Gen X, as you probably can guess. And, I'm sure there's a lot of things that I'm very stereotypical Gen X about, maybe my music choice. And then there's other things that maybe, I'm not as much like Gen X. And I think that's true for everybody. So I think you always want to be a little bit careful with that. But there are certainly generational preferences that you should be aware of. And if all of our messaging, so many advisors have been like, how do I attract baby boomer clients? That's your whole practice, right? You've built your career on that over the last 10 or 20 years. Well, maybe now it's not about attracting as many baby boomer clients. I wouldn't say stop. The youngest baby boomers are, just really in their early 60s. There's a lot of opportunity there. So I wouldn't say no to that. But maybe it's like the messaging, a lot of these clients you got were 50 when you got them. Well, 50-year-olds aren't baby boomers anymore. So maybe the messaging is a little bit different. Maybe their, work situation's different. I know you all probably know how to attract those people, but once again, do it with the end in mind. What are we trying to accomplish? What do I want this thing to look like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? How many of these clients can we retain those relationships? And then how many new relationships can we get? Because if ultimately at some point the enterprise value of your practice is important to you, and you're either going to sell the practice, pass it on to someone else, sell and stay, sell a portion of it, retire, have a succession agreement, work until you pass away, and then hopefully have an agreement that takes care of your clients and also your family. Any of those scenarios, which we will talk about more, I'm sure, going forward, this type of planning will help that enterprise value. The younger your practice is, the more valuable it is. The more solid relationships you have, the more valuable it is. If you have too much of your revenue tied up in a handful of high net worth elderly clients, your practice is worth less. And it doesn't mean that we don't want to help those clients. Of course we do. You've spent your whole life helping them. But what's next after that? How do we position ourselves to help yourself and help your clients and help their families? So as always, I hope this helps. Would love some feedback. Please like, subscribe, share this would be great if you're getting value out of these. I have gotten some feedback from some of you. The only question that I've gotten more than once, I think, is do you do these without notes? And the answer is yeah, because this is what I talk about all the time. Except for today, I did have notes because I didn't want to screw up the amount of money that each generation is going to inherit, because I probably would have if I tried to do that just off the top of my head. But these are things I do love talking about. I appreciate the positive feedback that you have given. Have a great day. We'll talk to you soon.